Hello everybody, welcome back to Off Meta Musings. I'm your host Itan, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. This video is really meant to be a little bit of a follow-up to the previous one, where I was talking about damage efficiency and how you're going to be rating your fighters in order to use them in your warbands. We're not really going to be talking so much about how you're building your warbands, but more how Games Workshop are designing theirs, how they're designing their fighters, and what I feel they could do just a little bit better. There's a trend in the bespoke warbands that normally what you've got is a couple of fighters that are really, really good, and the rest of the warband that's effectively just overshadowed by those really good fighters. And this is something that, of course, I don't necessarily agree with. So, yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, this is one part feedback for Games Workshop, I guess, and another part discussion about what they could be doing, how they could be doing it better. I'm going to focus quite a bit on the Hunters of Huanchi here, because I have been playing with the Hunters quite a bit recently. And yeah, I'm going to give some suggestions for them, but let's get going. I'm going to be using the Desecrators from Jade Obelisk as an example, but you can see it effectively across pretty much most bespoke warbands Games Workshop has put rules out for. You'll have a fighter, it'll have a number of different weapon loadouts, and there'll always be one weapon loadout that's way better than the rest of them, probably at the same points cost and with the same rune marks, so they have access to the same abilities. Now, this is something that you want to watch out for, especially if you're making your own warbands and you're doing some homebrew stuff. In the case of the Desecrators here, we've got the hammer and the pick. The pick does more damage because it's effectively got more attacks, and the difference in that one base damage from the hammer doesn't make enough of a difference for it to be seriously considered as an option. I get the idea, what they were going for here. The idea was, okay, we've got the hammer, which has more base damage, versus the pick, which has less base damage, and the idea would have been that you're going to use the hammer for big things, and you can use the war pick for little things. But because of the way Warcry's damage system actually works out, and the fact that they both have strength 5, it doesn't really matter in this case, that extra point of base damage. And when you do the maths, the pick comes out on top. So the point really to take away here is that when you're looking at your warbands, you're looking at designing your warbands, you should really have specific goals in mind for each of your fighters, so you don't have this kind of redundancy. Linked to this, we have the idea that all fighters in your warband, and this is if you're designing something for yourself, but Games Workshop, if you're listening, you want to make them all desirable, which means that there shouldn't be one fighter or two fighters that are way better than all of the rest and that are basically an auto-include. And this specifically when we're talking about Hunters of Huanchi, which is Claw in this case, which, as we know, you get one in the box, and the rest of the warband doesn't really work because the other fighters are actually not that good when compared to, and we can see it here. We've got the chameleon skinks with dart pipes and the skinks with moonstone clubs. They're only 5 points less than Huanchi's Claw. Even between dart pipe and the club is way better. The dart pipe has terrible damage versus the point of toughness and the bolus ability, so there's really no contest between those two, but they all pale in comparison with Huanchi's Claw. At least between the Claw and the club, there's some kind of choice to be made, whether you want Bellow of the Carnosaur or you want the bolus. Now, one place that I think Games Workshop actually did it right, and if you guys are listening, more of this please, is with Bloated Ones from Heart of Gur. You can see it here. You've got Bloated One with Claw, you've got Bloated One with Net. The Bloated One with Claw costs a little bit more, and it's got one more attack. So when you do all the maths and you see everything with the efficiency numbers and all this kind of thing, Claws really come out on top. But this is countered by the Net having an ability that it can use, which effectively is an extra attack that always wins on 3s. So if we remember back to the Statue Smasher Hammer versus Warpick suggestion, where the hammer's supposed to be versus big things and the pick is supposed to be against little things, this is a way to actually design a fighter that is better the higher the toughness is of your opponent, because it's always going to get this extra attack and it's always going to win on 3s. And if you're designing your warbands at home, this is, I think, the kind of way you want to go with your different kinds of weapon profiles. So have them all very similar, that's fine. But if you have something like a great sword versus a normal sword, and you want the great sword to do more damage to high toughness things and the normal sword to be better against little chaff units, you can give the normal sword more attacks, but give the great sword some kind of an ability that gives it a bit of a boost against those high toughness units so that they remain a viable option. Now I've got a little bit of a case study into the Hunters of Huanchi. I've talked about them quite a bit in my how to play video and in the last couple of event videos I did. I'll put links to them down in the description below, maybe up here, maybe around here, wherever they're going to end up. But they really, for me, highlight some of the problems of Games Workshop's approach to warband design. And I think with some small tweaks, they can, I say small, some medium tweaks, they can effectively be a very well-balanced all-round warband. I did set myself some constraints here. So one is to not change the contents of the Sundered Fate box, because that's how Games Workshop likes to run. If they're going to do different erratas and different FAQs, they'll all want everything to be self-contained into whichever boxes you're going to buy. And secondly, I didn't want to change the base fighter profiles all that much, because ultimately they are still skinks, they are still chameleons, and the stats are set. A couple of things I did want to do is remove unnecessary barriers to abilities and effects. I wanted to promote other options with allies. Maybe you wanted to ally stuff in from Hunters of Huanchi into your other warbands, or you wanted to ally other things instead of just a big beefy Achelian King style model. I wanted to give the skinks more agency, so actually give them the ability to do damage. I'm not saying do massive amounts of damage, but something where they can at least plink down a couple of wounds from a fighter if they need to, and also to make a credible option between doing that damage and using the Skink's reaction, which is ultimately what makes them so good in the first place. And I wanted to promote every option in the list, so not just going, okay, here's my Huanchi's Claws, this is how I'm going to use them, but saying, okay, I want to use my Skinks of Bolus, I want to use my Skinks of Blowpipes, I want to basically be able to use everything, and they should all be viable. So I'm going to start here. This is kind of the summary of what I've got. You'll see there have been a few changes, but ultimately, I think in my mind, there should be a clear reason to take Dart Pipes over the Bolus over Huanchi's Claws, even if it's just because Dart Pipes are cheap and they do basically no damage. They're super fragile, so they can be very cheap. The Bolus has the Bolus ability, and Huanchi's Claw has his ability. You'll be able to see here, I've slightly boosted the Chameleon Skink's Bolus attack, and like I said, I'm going to be talking about that in a minute. Upped its points value because it's got a better attack, so it should cost more, in line with the Huanchi's Claw, and the idea is that if you wanted to fill out with cheap fighters, you can go just Dart Pipes. If you wanted the Bolus, they have shorter range than the Claws, but they'll be doing more damage because of the extra attack and their melee attack damages. But if you wanted to take the Claw, it's got a bit more range, it's got more wounds, which is more in line with what you'll need for the reaction, and it's got Bellow of the Carnosaur over the Bolus. So I think there's an interesting choice there about what you might want to bring. Talking about the Boluses themselves, the stat line that I've taken is effectively from the Pterodon Rider. They've got what are called Sunleech Boluses. Not amazing. 3-inch range, 3 attacks, strength 2, 1/4 damage, so not all that massive. And then again on the Alpha, the same thing, but an extra attack, points boosts for both of them. And the idea here was effectively to go, which direction am I going to go in with my list building? This goes back to what I was talking about, making all options viable when you're designing your fighters and when you're designing your warband as a whole, where on the one hand, you've got the Bolus with its 3-inch range, so it should be fairly safe from return attacks, but 3 inches is way shorter than the 8 inches of the Claw, and if you're going to be attacking, you're not going to be reacting to run away, which is one of the key points about the Hunters and how they work. So I think it gives you more decision points in game, how you would want to use your fighters and what you would want to use them for, and I really think that's a good thing for the player. I also wanted to take a look at the Terrorwing and the Hornblower. This goes back to making allies more meaningful and removing unnecessary barriers to abilities. If we look at the Terrorwing itself, it's kind of fine, it's cheap, but it doesn't have the scout room mark, so it doesn't have access to any of the skink abilities, mainly the reaction itself. And also it's only got 8 wounds, so when you do use your Call of the Hunt from your Hornblower, it kind of runs in and it doesn't get to attack next. So it basically gets attacked and it dies. So the extra 2 wounds there really goes a long way to be able to keep it alive so that it can actually attack and do what it's supposed to do. For the Hornblower itself, I've got basically a minor change to Call of the Hunt. If you remove the Hunters of Huanchi requirement from the Hornblower, that suddenly opens up a bunch of interesting things. In Chaos, we've got things like the Skaven Beastmaster that work with the Beast Rune mark, but there isn't really anything equivalent in Order, which is why I think that if you gave the Hornblower the Ally Rune mark, then you could start to ally in the Hornblower into your Order lists, and if there were any Order beasts that they released, there aren't any as of yet. You could do vice versa. And then that gives you just more options all around. If you did want to do a beast focused order list, you could use the Hornblower and get some extra utility out of it. Now, this is kind of a summary of everything that I've been talking about and where I could see Hunters of Huanchi really working. As we can see, we've got a bunch of different points values now. You've got a clear distinction between the Sunleech Bolus, the Dart Pipe, and Huanchi's Claw, which gives you more decision points, A, when you're building your warband, and B, during games, which I think that's a bonus. A slight points break for the Dart Pipes because they're really just not that good. So the only thing they have going for them should be because they are cheap. And we've got the Terror Wing and the Skink Hornblower changes. So if you're listening, Games Workshop, this is my feedback on the Hunters. Like I said, I have played them quite a bit now, and they really do feel like a one-note warband. They have one thing that they do really, really well, but apart from that, if you need to kill anything or do any damage to anything, they're essentially not going to do it. Even their abilities, whilst they're really, really good, because of the way the warband is structured all around Huanchi's claws and using their reaction, you tend to put a lot of your dice into the extra movement abilities and not into your really cool Bellow of the Carnosaur or Bolus, which are really good disruption tools, but ultimately I haven't had the opportunity to use them that much. So that's it from me for today. Like I said, it was a bit of a strange one. One part feedback for Games Workshop, one part discussion about how I would like to see warbands made and how, if you were going to homebrew stuff, what you should be looking out for when you design your guys. If you like this kind of thing and you want me to take a look at other warbands to see how they could necessarily be improved, maybe some feedback on those, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know. Let me know in the comments below what you think about Games Workshop's approaches to building warbands, any places where you think they might have missed a mark, and any little changes you think that could be made in order to kind of improve the health of the game as a whole. And that's it from me, and I will see you next time.